Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the India's Reach series, our virtual educational series with the My Security Marketplace and My Security Media. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor and Director for My Security Media, and we're looking at aerospace, defence and security market trends, opportunities for Australia and the ASEAN region in partnership with the Aerospace and Defence Consultants of India Association. And our co-host Raman Sapori is missing in action. He's all safe and well, but he's not able to make episode number 6. For this particular episode, we have an esteemed panel, and we're going to dive into technical auditing standards and the cybersecurity, IoT, smart cities, and infrastructure domain. Now, we chose this particular panel and this particular subject because auditing and auditing standards, cybersecurity have all been a consistent theme up until this particular episode. And in fact, on our panel, I'll introduce Colonel Inderjeet Singh. This is his second episode, looking back from episode number 2. So, Colonel, thank you very much for joining us once again.
It's always a pleasure to be with you again, yeah.
Thank you very much. And you're in Delhi for the audience. And we have SY Go. SY, it's our first time, I think, face-to-face as well, but you're representing CISA Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur chapter. So welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And representing the Sydney chapter and my two close colleagues here in Sydney, Gurvinder Singh and Chirag Joshi. Gents, thanks for joining us. Thanks very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Great. Chirag, this is your second episode on our virtual educational series. I think you were our second one up, if not our first one up, when we first started the series.
Yeah.
Thank you.
At the tone.
And, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And that's still going quite hot on YouTube. And Gurvinder, you're on our channels today for the first time. Thanks very much. We've got your article, and I'll highlight that as we go through.
Yeah. Absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your time. I suppose another thing in terms of the discussion, we're all here on this particular session certified information systems auditors with ISACA, so we all hold that certification, and so we are coming in. I don't want to get that group think. In fact, we shouldn't have group think. That's part of the concept here of getting Australia, ASEAN, Malaysia and India together, and what our observations are as certified auditors in this particular space, and getting our thoughts on the current situation with COVID-19 and what looks like is going to be an ongoing roller coaster ride through a global pandemic. As we always do, let me just go back once. We had an interesting discussion last week, episode number 5, with Rohit Manchanda, the New South Wales Government's Trade and Investment Commissioner to India, and also AusCyber and Startup India. That session is now live on YouTube as well, and this was another good segue in terms of cybersecurity and the startup opportunities there. And I mentioned we're in episode 6. All of our previous episodes are there, and this panel is obviously an esteemed panel and joining an esteemed set of guests that we have. So we're really doing quite well here. This is episode 6. We set out to do a 6-week series. We've achieved that now thanks to today, and we've actually extended it by another 10 weeks. We're just going to keep going on with these discussions. There's too much just to stop now, and we will continue on. So Raman, no doubt, will keep us in tune with his membership there in India also. So news of the day, just my observations from the editor's desk in My Security Media. I think it's definitely, if you've not had a look at it or read it, Michael Pompeo, Secretary of State's speech, Communist China and the Free World's Future, really does set an interesting scene for us as we move into the second half of the year. And the India Ideas Summit has just been held as well. Very interesting there. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and some of the key speeches that came out of that particular summit is also very interesting and worthwhile having a look at. New Delhi, India is just receiving its French fleet of their Rafale jets as well. We covered off and touched on that last week, but they're starting to take off now and arrive in India. Interesting, India importing crude oil from US to rise as well. And obviously we're covering aerospace and defence and some of the key trends in this particular area and obviously it's not looking too good in terms of military risk, but these are all providing key trends to be monitoring, particularly as security professionals as well. Some drone news. US official says air-launched drone to be developed jointly with the Indian startup. It's an interesting one. And Drone Shield here in Australia is one to watch. It's a publicly listed company now. They've just signed a deal with the US Air Force and also a deal in Saudi Arabia in terms of that particular technology. Very interesting to watch. Australia, Japan, US exercises in the Philippine Sea, and we touched on last week as well in terms of the Quad with India. The naval exercises are also going to start with Australia, Japan, US and India for one of the first times. Again, some key trends on the Asia Pacific Security Magazine. This hit my desk today, the KPMG Venture Pulse Q2 2020 report on venture funding for startups. Good segue from last week with Startup India and AustCyber. So I haven't had a good look through this, but this is a very in-depth report in terms of venture capital raising across the world, particularly for Australia as well. Something to look at. We touched on yesterday, and we didn't know how many recommendations was on this last week, so I thought I'd keep it up. 60 recommendations came out of this report from the Industry Advisory Panel. It'll be interesting to see how the final strategy, expected to come to us in about September, actually looks. But again, one to start to flick through with 60 recommendations. Don't think I missed one there. COVID, not too much on COVID in terms of more economic news starting to come out this week on COVID and the impacts now that we're into a new financial year. I just wanted to highlight we do have that COVID-19 resources page on the marketplace for relevant content. And some other key reports that came out this week. This was yesterday, the Anatomy of Cloud Assessment and Authorisation from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, one to have a look through. And a couple of reports from McAfee, Checkpoint and CrowdStrike, all released sort of mid-year cybersecurity and threat reports this week, and also well worth having a look at, flicking through. But definitely the impacts of COVID-19 starting to be felt and measured, better measured now as we move through the year. So again, worthwhile going through in detail and having a look at these, particularly if you're an analyst or you're running a business using any of these vendor products. The Cyber Risk Leaders magazine is still available, and I just wanted to highlight yesterday our webinar with the Cybersecurity Task Force in New South Wales. If you followed our episode from last week with the New South Wales Trade and Investment Commissioner, he provided a lot of detail and insight into the New South Wales startup community and cybersecurity industry, and that goes into even further detail yesterday with the Honourable Victor Dominello, who's the Minister for Customer Service, and what they're looking to spend $1.6 billion over the next 3 years in New South Wales, with $240 million for cybersecurity. So well worth having a look. Goes for spot on 60 minutes, so not too bad. Okay, so that's enough from the marketplace, and we're going to talk to our panel now. Hopefully, I'm flicking through this thing. Our subject matter in terms of this particular series, nothing is really off the table, but we cover all aspects, and so I invite the panel here just to keep this in mind in terms of your considerations. Cybersecurity tends to be at the top of the echelon, but it covers everything from IoT downwards, including data protection and privacy, and all the way down to smart cities and the like. So just keep that in mind from the audience perspective. So I've introduced our audience. I mentioned their backgrounds. They all represent their local chapters of ISACA, and I just wanted to touch on, I've already mentioned actually, we've got Gurvinder's article just went up today, the Cyber Chef. So I like that, Gurvinder. And I'll wait for you to come on. I know what you're going to say as well. Good article there on TikTok, what is wrong with it and why the world is banning it. And we've covered TikTok in terms of being banned in India as well. I mentioned Colonel Inderjeet Singh on episode 2, and Chirag Joshi is an expert in terms of security awareness, cyber security awareness, and I'll plug your book a little bit later, Chirag, as well. So a published author in that particular area. So this is the background from this panel. I thought I'd start off We'll start off with Colonel Inderjeet Singh in terms of the Indian perspective. This is the Indian Rich series, and we'll obviously give you that respect in terms of just covering off these areas, but where does the importance of auditing and standards sit with you in India, and how would your sort of play be at the moment in terms of the situation?
Yeah. So thanks, Chris. It was really a wonderful introduction and the brief overview what you have given. And a pleasure to be here again for the second time. And it's always good to see the episodes YouTube or join it live. So it's always wonderful to be with you and to give you a perspective of what's happening in the auditing and the standard space. And just to give you the example of what happened in the COVID right now, and it will give you the insights as to what is happening on the auditing and the standard in India. Presently, what happened was like I think a month back, one of our power grid, it was being hacked by one of the APT attacks, and out of the 100 servers, that's in north of India in Kashmir. So almost 24 servers were being taken over by the hackers, and 4 servers they were able to steal the data. So that was the initial standpoint. If you look at it, where it gave a jerk to the government to do the re-audit of all the power grids in particular, because the power grids are really vulnerable when it comes to critical information infrastructure and their security, right? Then the second example which happened was the National Highway Authority of India. There was a hack attack which happened, and the data was lost. And then there was a attack on the signaling, railway signaling also which happened. These are happening back to back, and more so when we look at a lot of attacks which are happening, it gives a kind of thought process as to whether we are doing our audits or our standards implementation right. And not only this, we are seeing a lot of APT attacks which are growing. A lot of our banks are getting vulnerable. A lot of phishing attacks are happening. And when I say all this, my only thought-provoking question is our audits or the ISO standards what we are following, are they being followed in the retrospective which they are required to be? Because if these hacks are happening, that means there are somewhere vulnerabilities, there are risks which are there. I'm not touched upon the banks. Banks are always so vulnerable in India right now. So having said so, these are vulnerable. These are the kind of things which are happening right now. So when it comes to the implementation of the audit standards, so a lot of companies went in for the ISO 27001. We went in for 27032. Most of the companies, even when the COVID happened, we started speaking of the risk management, the business continuity, right? The disaster recovery plan. So all those standards in place, whether we are having it or not, right? I will touch upon the smart city part later on, the IoT part later on, but one of the studies which have just recently come up, it says that the malwares are reducing and more is the ransomware, right? And the IoT malware, which has really grown in last quarter or so. So in addition to the phishing attacks, so of course that's always the primary part of it. So all those things are happening right now. So everybody is being, in fact, the government of India has passed kind of the guidelines to audit their system again, right? And
can I interrupt? Sorry, when you say the government has implemented, can you be a bit more specific on what the government has implemented, or is there any either the new legislation?
So NCSC, that's the National Cybersecurity Committee, which has told all the major infrastructures to re-audit their systems which are there.
That's an act. That's a legislation.
That's a legislation. So we have already a cybersecurity policy in place to give perspective to all of us who are there. So we have a very comprehensive cybersecurity policy that was in 2030. Based on which we are supposed to have a lot of audits to be done. There is organization, all the audits which are there, they'll be ratified by the certified companies. Okay, all the ISO 27001 are being done through the companies which are certified by the cert. So that's how it really works. And then we have kind of bodies which are or the statutory bodies which are there, which are existing in India. I will touch upon as we do our discussion. I will talk about the BIS or the TEC or the TDSI. So those are the bodies which are there, which are responsible for creating the standards, the auditing standards for different whether it's application or whether it's the radios or the IoTs and other stuff. So we have a kind of as India, we have comprehensive look at these standards, and the only thing is the implementation. Yeah, the only thing we are now finding the challenge is the implementation part of it. Based on what's happening right now.
I think you've hit the key word there, and we'll try to come back to it, is implementation, because I'm seeing a lot of frameworks and we're seeing the standards and we're seeing the attacks and the vulnerabilities still there. So implementation is a key one. SY, I think we'll get an ASEAN viewpoint. Some of the key recent sort of moves in auditing and standards in Malaysia from your observation?
Yeah, I think for me to share from Malaysia perspective, there is actually a progression. I think previously majority of the organizations are actually relying on the ISO 27001 framework for cybersecurity. I think it is actually a pretty good standard, but from what we have observed from the survey done by globally, even by ISACA. So I think the recent one would be the 8th annual IT audit benchmark survey. ISO 27001 standard is no longer the so-called leader in the best common framework that actually most organizations are using. I think a lot of organizations now are actually like referencing to NIST cybersecurity framework. In that sense, tying it back to the Malaysia landscape, I think there is actually a gap from the transition, because currently the local infosecurity certification body, which is actually owned by the Malaysia Cybersecurity Malaysia organization, they are still recommending for organizations to use ISO 27001 because they have a localized version of the certifications whereby they provide the external audit services to organizations.
They're a for-profit body, aren't they?
Yeah. So it's highly recommended by them for local organizations to actually onboard this because it's what is presumed as the standards has been customized to fit the local landscape.
Yeah.
So aside from the ISO 27001, there are also other standards that actually Malaysia body actually uses. I think the other one is actually the common criteria, where they also have adapted it for local standards. And last but not least, also the Malaysian Trust Mark, which is actually for the e-business validations.
Okay.
If you ask for my opinion, I think the last part, the last certification on the Malaysian Trust Mark actually would fit quite aptly in the current period, whereby a lot of businesses are actually moving from offline to online. They are doing the digitalization, their transformations, and they want to be going to the internet to reach out to their customers now with the movement lockdowns and whatnot. So e-business validations and also these web presence audits, I think would be an upcoming area whereby auditors and organizations will need to address, given the damaged reputations that can come about both from the financial losses due to frauds and hacks, as well as any DDoS attacks that what Inderjeet has mentioned, the APTs and whatnot.
Thank you. Gurvinder and Joshi, I'm not Joshi, Chirag, sorry. I'm not too sure which one to go to because you both have been in critical infrastructure and different sectors as well. And I know your background's probably better than the other panelists. Gurvinder, I might come to you in terms of the auditing standards and the standards that you have seen. And then Chirag, I think given where you're sort of your move at the moment, and might go into the banking, open banking, because I just want to explore that Malaysian trust mark a little bit more and what we might start to see here in Australia. So, Gurvinder, just on auditing and the standards that you see as the benchmark for industry.
Before I launch into the auditing standards as such, probably it would be a good review of what kind of cybersecurity standards or frameworks we had been implementing. From the last 25 years since I have entered into this industry, we have gone through, I don't know, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 standards, but we have not done any of these standards justice that the way we should have done. And the point is, basically what I'm trying to do is, what you are auditing is what you have implemented. If you have not implemented the right standard or right framework, probably it's something which you would never be able to really articulate in a very consistent way, that what you have seen and what you have found. Standards are standards, right? So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm quoting the Trade Commissioner Rohit Manchanda, where he used a very interesting analogy around the Indian curries. I'll take the same example, but I will flip it up in a different way, because if you use a lot of spices and a lot of ingredients, the core of the dish or the core of the curry will also go away. So looking at that kind of an analogy around the curry, so you have to stick to a framework and do it well. But unfortunately, there are two different types of views in the industry which we have. One is driven by regulatory requirements, and other compliance requirements are in terms of how a particular organization or company markets itself in the industry, or selling their products in the market. So these are the two key drivers of what we are seeing in Australia, at least in terms of how the standards are being implemented or compliance programs are being implemented. In the last 15 years or so, what I have found is that it is predominantly ISO 27001 driven, and it is a management system. So it is not very prescriptive in that sense that, okay, yes, you have to be, you have to do this. Whereas, the other kind of standards which we had been following is, or put onto the organizations are like PSEI DSS, which is very prescriptive in nature. And what that has done is basically, because it is too much prescriptive, we are just reducing the scope. ISO is not very prescriptive. We are just crying that it doesn't tell us how to do things. So there is a little bit of a gap in there where we feel, the standard writers found that, okay, there is a gap that, what is good enough, right? So, and they come up with another standard. They came up with another standard. And that realization is in government as well. And government started coming up, like especially in Australia, like for example, you have ASM, you have Australian Security Management Standard, we have ISM model here, we have Essential 8 here, and some of our local governments or state governments are now talking about new frameworks as well. So I don't know what it's going to achieve, what these new frameworks would achieve when we have not implemented those standards which already exist. So that's where I'm a bit concerned that we might be reinventing the wheel again, and we will be going into the same rabbit hole where we don't have a good implementation plan to implement that framework, but at the same time we are looking at to solve some problems. Going back to my earlier comment on audit and auditing standards, if you see from an auditing perspective, they are very regulatory specific. Unless and until you have a regulation requirement, auditing seems to be very fluous. And even the auditee and an auditor is very fluous in nature. If you don't have to meet a certain compliance requirement, auditing is very fluous in that sense. And from my perspective, what we really have to see it is from an organization perspective or from an industry perspective is the maturity around your implemented controls. So we should start looking at those aspects of, like, for example, there are new standards and new guidelines are coming in terms of capability maturity model, right? So we can actually develop these cybersecurity capability maturity indicators and see how our organizations are faring against those capabilities. And from my perspective, that's the right way of having that journey from where you have no controls or some controls were working and effective, and then on the other side of the spectrum, you are perfect, you are the best, and you are the to achieve what you wanted to achieve from your standing perspective. So taking it from right to left, I believe that that capability model is the one which I think should be followed by the industry and the.
Well, I'm going to bring up that model very shortly. And Chirag, your take on this, and I think one thing that hasn't mentioned was I thought Gurvinder was going to go there in terms of APRA 234, it's a regulatory model to go on. I'll invite your comments there from what you've got so far.
Look, I echo a lot of what Gurvinder said in terms of taking a different approach to frameworks and standards and looking at maturity. Now, I think in the conversation before was around, why do we still have all these breaches despite us, being compliant? Because compliant is not equal to security. And what you're seeing really is there are two sets of things involved. One is frameworks, which are overarching, skeletons that give you all types of recipes that you can engage in to prepare your meals. But then standards, which are a lot more specific, and standards really, if you think about them, they're a formal set of activities which you can repeat and come at approximately the same outcome. And with that in mind, so if I think about APRA CPS 234 as for the financial services, I think that set the tone in terms of the expectations that the sector should have. However, it's not a prescriptive standard either. So there are different ways in which you can achieve those control objectives. So what are you trying to do with that standard is the key point, is what is the objective of that standard? And the same applies for if you look at the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, and the framework they put out, which is Australian Energy Sector Cybersecurity Framework, AES-CSF, which is based off NIST CSF in the US. And it's similar, but I like the fact that they also take a maturity-based view of controls, and they also take the view of the inherent risk of the entity involved. So I think that is a good way to look at controls and frameworks. Now, specifically, I think that the challenge which I am seeing is, and when you talk about implementation, I think what you're seeing also is a bit of a knowledge gap. You're seeing people very familiar with frameworks, high-level objectives, but they struggle to articulate what that should actually mean when it comes to technical implementations. So most of the incidents, in fact, in Australia, and I've seen the previous episodes, Chris, so well done on the series, but we've talked about the standards involved and the rise of ransomware attacks. We saw Australia got hit by a bunch of them, and a lot globally as well. But what you're seeing essentially is failure of two primarily hygiene controls around vulnerability patching and access management. Essentially, these two could have addressed more than 90% of these situations. Yeah. So while frameworks are necessary, standards, I think, serve two purposes. One is they allow you to, compare yourself, benchmark yourself, they serve as a yardstick, but they also give assurance to your partners. They offer an assurance that you are complying with a set of agreed upon best practices. So I think that's another value that you can give to your brand in terms of quality. But the level of customization you need to make internally to apply these standards, if they're not driven from a regulatory perspective, is your risk appetite. And I think that's where NIST CSF has had so much traction in Australia, because NIST CSF has broken down controls in a very simple manner. You identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, a language which boards understand, because that's where decisions are made, and the executive level where fundings are approved, and they understand that language. So when you play that picture out, I think that's helped a lot of organizations go on cyber transformation journeys. So that's really what I'm seeing and where the gaps are.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think what I want to do is sort of link this to yesterday's session. So for our Indian audience and our Malaysian audience, there's a new cybersecurity task force with Standards Australia. So this is a task force of government, state government at this stage, linking with other governments, but obviously linking with Standards Australia and industry groups across all sectors. So I think when you get to a standard where we're talking standards, our industry understands all the standards. We're now at a task force level for industry. The question has to be asked, you know, what are we actually doing? What are we aligning? And I think the right thing there from Chirag is, what are we trying to actually achieve? And then what level of controls? Now, that's quite blurry. That's from yesterday's webinar. This is hopefully a little bit clearer. But P from the Australian Cybersecurity Network walked through this. So this is the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. This is the MITRE attack framework. This is the ISO, or International Organisation of Standardisation, ISO 27000, 27001. This is the National Cybersecurity Centre from the UK, the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, Centre for Information Security, the CIS, the Australian Cybersecurity Strategy, which will come out, which will be another framework in its own right, and then the Cybersecurity Model Certification. Now, one thing I want to just touch on, particularly because we've got an ISACA panel, but also probably an ISACA audience in terms of who will actually end up watching this as well. Just touching on the cybersecurity maturity model, and Gurvinder's already mentioned that. So the CMMI from ISACA is something that we're introducing onto the marketplace as well, and we have you know, kind of the rights to sell this or to promote it as well. And SY, I was supposed to be in Malaysia to talk about this in July at your conference.
Yeah.
How much, but it can be sort of viewed as potentially expensive for large enterprise as well, depending on where you're coming from. What type of appetite is there to introduce these models from what the panel has seen? And I think Inderjeet, maybe coming back to you, how much exposure have you had to the CMMI? I'll just put this one up here. This is the platform placemat, as they call it, in terms of the risk models. Yeah, Colonel Inderjeet, what's your view on the CMMI, and are you seeing much of that or the cyber security capability and maturity model being talked about in India?
So, yeah, so we are coming up with a cybersecurity policy right now. I think it was supposed to come out in the second quarter of 2020. So that's what we are also trying to work on similar lines, as to have a maturity model for the complete cybersecurity posture, where we, you know, the standards and the companies to follow those kind of, you know, audit policies to be in place. So I think it's got delayed, maybe another month or two. We should be having that cybersecurity policy on a similar line.
Very good. And that's why it was interesting. One of the reasons I brought this up was because of our early discussions earlier in the year, and I would have spent a lovely 2 weeks in Malaysia around about this time now, so I'm very disappointed. Where did you end up going as a chapter in terms of the CMMI and sort of the understandings in your chapter network of this model?
To be honest, I think in Malaysia, the CMMI model is still predominantly actually more prominent in the software development houses. But if we talk about a cybersecurity maturity model, it is still very much not heard of currently in the local landscape. But we as the local chapter, we constantly try to promote this during our member events and half-day talks after the partnership between CMMI and also ISACA. So, but I see that the cybersecurity maturity model here that is being proposed might come in hot when there is this increase in the governance or the need for organization or businesses to demonstrate that they are actually safe to transact with. So it's not coming from a compliance perspective, but it's more of a due diligence and also a show of confidence to the customers of organizations that want to go online.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Gurvinder, Chirag, I'll open it to you and how much exposure you've had to this. If have either of you implemented this model or started the journey?
Just to let you know the history of this particular product from ISACA, as part of Guidance and Practices Committee way back in 2015, we were thinking of doing something like that, mapping it to a NIST CSF. There was something similar like NIST CSF at that time as well, and looking at how we can create a similar kind of a maturity model, looking at CMMI. This is just before ISACA bought CMMI. And came up with their using that particular maturity model and mapping it with the NIST CSF. So it's not, from my perspective, this is not new for me in that sense. And then this product was then when CMMI was bought, this product became a kind of a de facto model for us, for ISACA, to really map it with other frameworks or internal or ISACA IP as well in that sense. I'm quite exposed to this from the fact that we did a pilot with the tool to work with the things at that time, and with the core producers at that time, who is no more there with ISACA, has a vision of having this particular tool implemented at a very fast pace, quick adoption, from a quick adoption perspective. But this didn't happen from the fact that probably as ISACA is not a good salespeople, and they were not able to sell this product in that sense. The other aspect of this particular CMMI maturity model, which I think would be more effective, is then when we can introduce a concept here, is concept of continuous auditing or the real-time auditing perspective. So if we can combine these two aspects, and we have to sell this from a real-time auditing perspective, that what this tool does. This tool does real-time auditing for you. And that is where it will tell you that, okay, what sort of compliance you have, or what sort of risk management or risk acceptance or risk treatment status or maturity you have in your organization. So from that perspective, the pilot which we did was very limited scope pilot, but then it delivers what it says it will deliver. The only problem with this, I see it, is there is a lot of manual aspects also associated with it, but then with any tool, it is as good as it is implemented. So I would definitely, suggest that, recommend that, have a look at it, go for a pilot. Enterprise ISACA enterprise team is willing to do the pilots as well. So have a pilot done for your organization and see if it is fit for purpose for what you guys are doing. So it is a fantastic tool, and everyone, even on the panel, if you have not seen it, must see it.
Yeah,
no, I agree. I think it's
you're BSO, because you can break this down into different business units and apply it. So yeah, over to you in terms of your perception of this.
Yeah, no, look, I've been a fan of CMMI methodology for a while now. I've been using it all the way back from my days in the US. So even before ISACA bought it. Now, the way I see the implementation of it, it obviously gives us a maturity view, which is really important. I think where the struggle comes from and making it real is to business decision makers. And when you actually break it down to business groups, is what does it mean for me to be at 4 or 5, right? CMMI has all these levels.
Yeah.
What does it really mean? Because you can say a practice is documented, practice is optimized or implemented. I think the challenge is, how do you translate that into actual activities? And this goes back to my previous, when I was speaking earlier around risk profiles, because the CMMI gives you a view of your control maturity. Now, ideally, you should be tying this to your cyber risks, because as controls mature, correspondingly, the risks should be coming down. And I think that's the tie-in which needs to happen, is once you select your control set, this CSF, ISO, pick your favorite one, and then you tie it back to the key cyber risks you're exposed to. Once you have the key controls mapped out, then you can have a conversation on operating those key controls at a higher level of maturity on CMMI, versus other controls which can operate at a lower level of maturity, because then that translates into real decisions, into real technologies which need to be deployed, and prioritization of tools. So I think that's where it can become more real and pragmatic, because I still see, so as ISACA, we understand as an industry of practitioners, we get it. But once you start talking this to people who are actually making decisions and coming it from a technology agnostic background, I think they still struggle to see the value between a 4 and a 5. So I think that's where you need to break it down more clearly for them.
One thing I don't know if we're going to get time is also the language of auditing and standards is probably not on here, and how we deliver auditing reports is a real big factor. I mean, why are we doing this at the end of the day? Now, I'm just conscious of time because we could literally talk all day. I just wanted to get two key things on the outcomes in terms of auditing, and Chirag touched on that also in terms of my observations, and Gurvinder's also mentioned in terms of just-in-time access control management, or sorry, real live-time auditing. Two things I've heard in the last week. One is I was speaking to the head of security for cloud with Google in terms of real live auditing and patching as well at the same time. And the other one is just-in-time access management is another thing that I'm hearing. So when we talk about the vulnerabilities and hygiene around access management and patching being two key things, I'm starting to hear, you know, real live patching during while systems are live on cloud environments, and then also the just-in-time access management and identity access management. So we might get there one day. We might, probably won't. I sort of just want to close off on those comments and sort of the observations, and then if you can bring it back to maybe where you see the sector going around IoT, smart cities, we're all sort of bedded at home now. Remote working is with us for some period of time. Just take a few minutes yourselves and just to make some closing comments on some thoughts that you have on your mind right now, just to close this off. Inderjeet, where do you see this heading, and what are some of the key things that stood out today for you as well?
So, you know, though we are going in for the right kind of standards, but the implementation part, that's what I'm trying to, you know, emphasize again and again. We got the best of the standards, we got the best of the, you know, the things which are there, but then implementation and, you know, following those standards is a bigger challenge which we are seeing today. Even in the industry, the implementation, if I take it, even the ISO 27001, what the percentage of the companies which have actually imbibed that is very low, right? Even the NIST standard which is there, or the CMMI standard which we are talking of. So though we got the standards, implementation challenges are going to be there. Now coming on to, I'll just touch upon the point of the IoT standards we have got. Again, we have the best of the standards which are being done by, and there's a kind of, you know, different standard sets, tool sets which are there by different organizations going in for standards, whether it's, you know, ETSI or IEC or ISO or different organizations. We are yet to come up to a base standard in India for the IoT. That's where the struggle is. And when we are implementing the smart cities, and there are 100 smart cities, Gurvinder and Chirag would also appreciate that. You know, the standards part was a bit, you know, taken a back seat. It lagged behind. But that's where our next challenge is going to be, to have the right kind of standards implementation and, you know, the auditing of those standards in a retrospectively regular manner. So those are the kind of things which I will like to you know, share with you. That's the ground experience, because that's how it's really happening. And definitely we'll like to go in for the better kind of implementation part, better you know, acceptance by the different companies altogether. So that's the time will tell how fast we do that.
Yep, quality is everything as well. So Yoong, your thoughts and final thoughts as well in terms of what you're seeing Malaysia smart cities infrastructure and the implementation being a key factor?
Well, when we're touching about smart cities and infrastructure, I like to actually tie it to the upcoming rise of automations, be it on not just the physical infrastructures, but also cloud, and also nowadays artificial intelligence, AI. So when it comes to AI, that is largely what's driving smart cities and infrastructure development. AI is very much still a very new area, which I believe most of the standards today do not have anything that is very much relevant to a prescriptive model to auditing AI. So I guess coming back to what the panelists have shared before, you have the prescriptive model, you have the framework model, high level guidance standards overview. Do you want to be the best curry cooker, or you want to have something that you select based on what you want to build? So for me, for Malaysia context, right, I think whatever localized standards that the government agencies have built or implemented, it will not be effective if, let's say, it's not being interpreted or being implemented correctly, right? So I think having the right talents that will be able to implement those standards, interpret it and implement it will be crucial. And most of the breaches today is still due to lack of very primitive security controls deficiency. So, i.e., lack of a cyber hygiene. I think we have enough of the standards. We could evolve. This is my point of view. We could evolve those common standards, globally accepted standards that we have today to suit what is upcoming technologies that's coming in. But we need to get the baseline, our foundation right, which I think in this case, I would actually very much prefer organizations to very much invest their knowledge and investment of their staff into CIS security controls. Get it right, and your operational team members can be the best curry cookers, but the top part there needs to know what's the business direction is. Then you would know best what you have in place and leverage on that.
Yep. And I shouldn't go past the Malaysian curries too. So, you know, can't go past the red Malaysian curry, I'm sorry, as well. Gurvinder, some closing comments, and just to the audience listening, if you do have some final final questions that you want to raise, welcome to do so. We'll might go a little bit over time, but we're going to be pretty much on time. So, Gurvinder, some closing comments from yourself on these observations just on this panel.
First of all, you know, I'm going to share with you this, that I feel this curry example is going to be a very, very popular example on your, at least an Indian series or Asian series for that matter.
We should have called it the Cyber Curry series.
The Cyber Curry series. You know, and that too, the two turbinated sakes sitting on this panel coming from North India, this would be better. My closing comments, and typically I will take you know, smart cities and, you know, from an infrastructure security perspective, my take on this is basically look for a glue which works for you. The glue here, what I mean by glue is a framework or a standard which works for you. It doesn't have to. You don't have to follow that. Okay, yep, this organization is following this, so I should follow that. Don't do that. And take a glue which works for you and work with it and do it well. And I will echo what Colonel Inderjeet has said. The implementation is the key. If you don't do basic hygiene, if you don't do the stuff you need to do to stay secure, no standard or no framework would you know, secure you in that sense. These are my closing comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chirag, I think I want to send this back to the New South Wales Cybersecurity Task Force in terms of this particular discussion. And I think just in terms of what Gurvinder just said, in terms of what the whole panel said, the concept of keeping it simple, it doesn't have to be overly complex, because we are talking to the small and medium enterprise businesses at the end of the day, for the Australian market in particular, but even for India and even for Malaysia, majority of business is small and medium-sized enterprise. Does it have to be overly complex? And what's something, the simple stuff that small business should just be doing?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Chris. I do think, though, that there is room for innovation in the standard space as long as it's solving a new problem. It's so, and you see that. So IoT and smart cities will, they're interlinked. IoT has a massive scale, a scale unlike anything you would see in IT, and that in itself makes it a governance challenge. So there are opportunities in the IoT space which are not addressed currently. So you see things addressed by the IoT Security Framework and Foundation, which has some good publications. OWASP has put out their top 10 IoT risks, which I think these are relevant because they actually solve a real problem. Now, the aspect about smart cities and IoTs, I think a perspective is, so while you have, you're collecting massive amounts of data. So I'm not sure if you've seen, Chris, but I think it's the National Transport Council based out of Victoria. They were recently called for comments around collecting data from vehicles, right? So and they're going to apply that to potentially improve our land transport system efficiencies there. So that's a worthy outcome. Now that's a real example where we need to start thinking about considerations for cybersecurity in terms of attack surfaces. But then there are also considerations around privacy and ethical collection and usage of data. So I think that goes to the trust in systems. And this is where we need to actually outline real standards and data exchange frameworks. I think there is overall pretty good understanding of cyber and areas there. But this area, and you brought up open banking earlier too, the same situation, I think is making data collection and data exchange almost frictionless to you as a consumer, but even the entities there now essentially have to be very transparent about how your data is handled, and your data is your own, not the entity which you've given it to. So that's where I think we need to investigate more, and the efforts should be focused on, and that's where we'll get the most value for a buck.
Yep, absolutely. I think, again, that's something else small business should be listening to in terms of that data protection and their customers. Obviously, the customer expectations increasing as well. So just those fundamentals and the fundamental hygiene approaches as well for any size business. Well, look, on that note, I think if there's anything else, we'll follow up with each of you. Thank you so much for your time today. That was an hour killed very easily. And we could have touched on other areas, so no doubt we'll have you back. So I'd like to thank our panel, and the audience always does this to me. Whenever I say there's no questions, then there's a question. So the question is, how will 5G communications be affected by cybersecurity? Will it improve? I think we've kind of touched on it. We won't go on a whole new subject of 5G, but 5G come back to smart cities, IoT infrastructure as well. That'll be the driver and the backbone for that. I think 5G is something that we might well have a whole episode on and talk about 5G in its own right. So if that's of interest, gents, we'll definitely have you back. So look, just on this panel, just to give them recognition, Colonel Inderjeet Singh, second episode, thank you so much for your time there representing New Delhi, ISACA. SY Go in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, representing ISACA Kuala Lumpur. Thank you so much for your first episode. Gurvinder Singh and Chirag Joshi, both esteemed members of the ISACA Sydney chapter and very prominent here in New South Wales as well. So thank you so much for your time and joining us. Chirag, I'm going to plug you here. It's just keep plugging the marketplace, obviously. That should be up now in terms of Chirag's book, The 7 Rules to Influence Behaviour and Win at Cybersecurity Awareness. It is available on the marketplace, or you can go to chiragjoshi.com and get that copy. And very worthwhile having a look. Easy read, as it should be in terms of just 7 rules, keeping it simple. On the marketplace, all our latest reports and the like are available week to week. Let me go back one. And we do have the ISACA Cybersecurity CSX labs available on there. and we're proud to be media partners with the 2 chapters there of ISACA and pushing out the ISACA message in that regard. This little mouse of mine. We do have a forum on the marketplace. Now, forums are one of those, unless someone's posting into it, it's not successful. So if any of the audience want to make some comments or have particular episodes and topics covered, go to the forum on the marketplace and just put in those details there, and we'll look to cover that. Like I said, we've extended this by another 10 weeks. Week to week, we'll build a panel and we'll cover off all different topics in that regards. But there is we were going to do a Slack channel, but then we had to onboard people. So just an online forum on the marketplace is something we'll do, and we'll post other handouts there as well. Next week, we're looking at 3D printing. We'll see if 5G comes up on that as well. But applications and advancements, and we've got the WePro 3D Program Director on, Dr. Chanda, to keep it short for me. So thank you very much for his time. Looking forward to that particular session. Air Vice Marshal Arvinda, and then we've also got Shibu John, who is running 3D Printing World, and Bharat Malkani from Max Aerospace Group. So that particular panel will be looking at 3D printing and advancements. And these guys have sort of defence aerospace background, so obviously looking at 3D printing applications for aerospace and defence. This thing, and then the following week we're looking at MRO, maintenance, repair and overhaul for aerospace sector. And there's some really interesting advancements in that particular space, particularly on the training and sort of the virtual environments and virtual inspection for maintenance and repair. 3D modelling will come into that as well. So very interesting particular topic on the following week. So please do stay tuned to us week to week. These sessions are recorded, and welcome you to stay in touch on our YouTube channel, My Security TV, or the Virtual Educational Series and our podcast show. So on that note, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, gents, appreciate your time, and stay safe.
Thanks.
Thanks, Delhi. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes,
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Well, have a good day, guys. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.